The castle doors groaned inward, breathing in the dry leaves like a man eating spaghetti. Benjamin Daniels' heartbeat quickened. This building had to be the place. A pile of dead villagers lay to the side, drained of blood like discarded ketchup packets. Twin puncture marks adorned all their necks. Others might have missed such a clue, but he'd been hunting the vampire for decades. Benjamin had learned to detect his quarry in even the faintest of traces. He unsheathed a stake and pulled out his wooden mallet. Behind him, the setting sun knocked its glass of red wine off the table, filling the valleys. Long black fingers stretched as God made elaborate shadow puppets. Ben sighed. It would be night soon. He had to do this before Count Eichelg, Gerlach to friends, woke for the evening. If he didn't, the Count would either kill him, turn him into one of his army of the undead, or escape him for the umpteenth time. All were undesirable outcomes. He strode past the rotted wooden doors and headed for the cellar stairs. Echoes bounced around him, reverberating off the moist cobblestones. The musty aroma of stone and the waft of damp air intermingled to make a delightful perfume. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. He grumbled. If only he'd finished knitting his jumper. The complex pattern meant it was taking him longer than usual. It had a picture of a vampire bat inside a prohibition sign, a red circle with a diagonal dash. Deeper in, the stench of decay took a firmer hold. A Chinese finger trap stuck on his olfactory system's digits. It was like sour milk mixed with rotten tomatoes. The dying light from the open doors grew weaker, but a strange red glow throbbed from beneath. On a ballerina's tiptoes, Benjamin descended the final steps. Hundreds of red candles circled the room, their flames casting cozy pools of light. In the middle of it all, a black coffin sat upon a catafalque like a dead walrus. Benjamin grunted. Either Gerlach had painted them with lipstick, or he'd made them out of the blood of his victims. And the Count didn't strike him as the makeup video tutorial type. He checked the four corners of the room, and then approached the casket. Despite the candle's light, the coffin was so black that it appeared two-dimensional. Benjamin ran his hands over the wood. Layer upon layer of pictographs carved the surface. He couldn't make out what they were. Once done with his business here, he'd return with paper and a bumper pack of crayons to perform rubbings. But arts and crafts could wait until after the murder. Ben lifted the lid like a divorced dad opening a Tupperware box filled with cold lasagne. Lying upon a bed of red satin, with his thumb tucked into his mouth, was Gerlach Eichel. On either side of his thumb, his two blood-sucking teeth protruded over his lips. His white hair puffed up in a bouffant heart shape, proving that not even vampires are immune to trends. His lined skin was as white as the white crayon in Ben's bumper Crayola packet that he'd forgotten to bring. He wore pajamas with a repeating motif of disembodied vampire fangs. In his non-thumb-sucking hand, he clutched a well-worn bat plushie. Benjamin reminded himself that even the most ferocious animals looked cute whilst asleep. Count Eichelg was a monster who'd taken thousands of lives during his few hundred years on the planet. He brushed aside the vampire's hand. The bat plushie, which had a pair of vampire fangs jutting out of its mouth, squeaked when he moved it. Ben scowled. The beast was well practiced in keeping itself alive. He ought to stay strong and keep to his mission. These adorable defense tactics wouldn't work on him. Ben rested the stake above where Gerlach's ancient engine of a heart coughed and spluttered. The vampire stirred, legs twitching like a cat, dreaming of hunting. Benjamin brought the mallet down, punching the stake through Count Eichelg's heart. Gerlach's eyes popped open, and he opened his fanged mouth in a scream. He sat bolt upright with the stake protruding from his chest. The shriek died to a hoarse whisper until the vampire sighed, shoulders slumping. He said 2 words before exploding into a cloud of ashes. Oh bugger. Ben's heart hammered in his chest in the way that Gerlach's never would again. Cold sweat dampened his neck and armpits. He'd done it. He'd done it. Gerlach Eichelg's reign of terror was over after several centuries. He, Benjamin Daniel, had succeeded. They said he was crazy to devote his life to wiping the scourge from the planet, like a bug off the world's windscreen. Well, who was crazy now? He laughed in the candlelit room next to the ash-filled coffin. He slapped his knee. When he finally emerged victorious from the castle, night had fallen. Further down in the valley, birds chirped and wished each other a good night. Benjamin grumbled, frowning. Something here didn't feel right. It took him a moment to put his stake on it. The night felt safe and quiet. Too safe, too quiet. And not in a cheesy movie line kind of way either. All his life, he'd viewed the darkness as something to fear. The gloaming had always been a place where evil lurked. But now, nothing. He sat down on the castle steps with a grunt. The moonlight lit up the scene in shades of gray and pale blue. He realized he did indeed feel blue. With Count Eichelg on the prowl, Benjamin had had a purpose, a task. Now that that task was over, what was he to do? Did Ben even have a purpose anymore? Sure, he'd saved countless lives by doing so, but what of his life satisfaction? Would his rescues ever think about that, huh? He now felt aimless, like a balloon drifting from a child's hands after you've cut the string with a pair of scissors. Benjamin had killed his nemesis. He thought this would have brought him joy, but he appeared to be mistaken. Where to from here? He rubbed his temples, deflating. The autumn leaves skittered around him. He needed another monster. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked. I have seen my fair share of hungover drunks and addicts in withdrawal on my way to the studio. It was not unusual in downtown Portland, especially with the government decriminalizing drug use. I'm also the producer for some pretty self-destructive artists, so these were also hazards of the trade. Once I even administered Narcan for one of our emo rappers who overdosed at the studio. It was a first for me, but the 9th for him. Some people never get out of their own way even when it messes with their art. But this young lady, from what I could see, looked like a pile of heaving trash on the side of the street with black garbage bags on either side of her. I'm pretty sure she was sitting on one too, like a broke gamer on a beanbag. She was completely folded in upon herself, partially covered by a disheveled curly red wig, but her choppy intakes of breath gave her away. She was clearly in distress. I tried to stay a respectful distance away from her. The city was damp, and the cuffs of my bomber jacket rubbed against the plastic wrap my tattoo artist used around my left wrist. I had a new muse, and I had to memorialize it. It happened more often than not. My tattoo artist joked I was running out of space, but I still had my face left for when I feel musically elevated. But inspiration had me headed to the studio and coming across this scene. Directly behind Dumpster Girl was a poster of a headlining act to perform at the concert hall. Just around the corner, a young pop diva with an obnoxiously large wig, in loud clothes screaming into a mic, the words of her headlining tour above her head, like a halo. Fool heart. The legendary bar had a penchant for hosting artists just before they became unattainable by their massive popularity. Personally, I think this place was where true artistry came to die. Mainstream media and corporate America sucking the life of real, authentic art. "No!" she screamed out. It startled me. I tripped backwards trying to give her more space, scuffing my already beat-up white Converses and fully submerging my right foot in a sludge of garbage city water. My toes now squishing about, freaking disgusting. I didn't want her to get hurt, She was basically in the road. Her torn black nylon-covered legs and chunky black leather boots just dangled there like the Wicked Witch after the house landed on her. "No pictures, no autographs, no fucking fans!" she screamed again with the same urgency she did just moments ago. Big, watery blue eyes popped out. She tried to push off the garbage bean bag below her, but the more she tried, the deeper she sank, like quicksand. A car sped by, splashing us both with the same garbage water that my foot now swam in. I put my right hand out, still trying to be helpful. "I'm not a fan," I say, matter-of-factly. She reluctantly gave me her hand, knowing there was no way out of the trap she was in. "So you never heard of me?" she says while fruitlessly wiping her unusual get-up. A tight red glittery bustier, and a frilly black skirt. It was as loud as the pop girlie behind her. "Well, I didn't say that," I said. I pointed at the huge poster of what was clearly her face before she decided to scream at me again. The poster almost mocked her disheveled appearance. Her large wig was now clutched in her hand, and her short brown locks were now congealed. She looked like the knockoff version of herself, a mere homage to the glamorous pop queen splattered outside the brick wall of some Portland bar. A group of stylish teens turned the corner, at first distracted by whatever dance they were trying to do for TikTok, the fool-hearted melody playing from one of their phones, until they noticed her. "Hey, aren't you?" one of them said. But then she just started running. I don't even know why, but I started running too. Or maybe I was chasing. I couldn't tell. It didn't seem like she had a place she was headed to. Her clunky boots prevented her from running too fast, and I caught up to her with ease. "Why did you follow me?" she asked abruptly, stopping in the middle of the street, distrust soaking every word. She looked past me to make sure there was no one else that followed. I said sheepishly, "wanted to make sure you were okay." She didn't look like she believed me. "I didn't know it was you," I said. "I mean, I knew she was in town, but I didn't know that trash heap was her. If you're trying to hide out, I have studio a block up. It's the weekend, no one is going to be there." "Not a fan, right?" she said, jabbing her finger into my chest harder when I didn't answer fast enough. "Right?" I shook my head. This time we walked. Her paranoia had her looking back every few seconds. If she were Lot's wife, she would have turned into a pillar of salt. The studio was small and humble. There were a few local artists' photos that lined the outside hall that had recorded there over the years. The kid I saved once was the last one. He hadn't been in a while and his manager dodged my calls. I assumed rehab, which was better than a stint in jail or, worse, dead. Dead before he ever even made in a dent in the music industry would be a tragedy. "Do you want a drink?" I asked, a little nervous. She looked me up and down, assessing my character before she nodded her head. I reached for my stash under the soundboard. I felt the Velcro strap that kept my gun stuck to the side of the wooden panel, that I kept for protection, and handed her a filled cup. "That's generous," she said jokingly, taking a sip and wincing from the bitterness of my cheap taste. "You know I recorded your hit single," I said. That was common knowledge. She couldn't fault me for that. My tattoo was becoming itchy. It was probably time to clean it. But I couldn't seem to get away from her, or maybe I just didn't want to get away. She looked genuine and vulnerable, her fingers roaming the soundboard. The sensation fading, and a true artist re-emerging, like a phoenix from the ashes. "Oh yes, let's toast to my overnight success, the one that took 10 years in the freaking making," she said sarcastically. "And they want another one. Like it's that easy." Now she sounded bitter. "Real art can't be mass-produced," I said, trying not to sound overly critical of her artistic choices. "Is that why you stayed local?" she asked. "In your shitty studio with your little gun." She topped off her glass, then bent down and grabbed my gun. Is this thing even loaded? She expertly took out the chamber. I held that gun a total of 3 times since I purchased it. I just assumed it was loaded. I would probably never use it. I was the nice guy, the hero type, the guy who helped his client, who overdosed in his studio, who helped hungover pop sensations and stayed true to real art. Don't worry. I'm from the Midwest, I know my way around a gun, she said, sensing my discomfort. She placed the gun on the soundboard and refilled her glass. "Want to record something?" I asked sheepishly. "I thought you said you weren't a fan," she asked. "I'm not," I said, probably too quickly, "but you're an artist and I'm a producer." "Keep it local," she said, a small devilish smile played across her lips. I could tell she wanted to. What harm could this do to an emerging star? I lit up the booth and went to adjust the soundboard. Suddenly, she grabbed my wrapped wrist and lifted my sleeve. The italic words scrolled atop my wrist, visible through the plastic wrap, accompanied by a small heart in between the words. "Fool-hearted Dawn. You have to understand," I stuttered in response. "This song changed my life." "I should have known," she said, pointing the gun at me, and then she pulled the trigger. Pop! The bullet lodged into my forehead. I slumped over on the soundboard and watched her saunter out. Everyone's a fan. Rachel slammed on the brakes, leaving tire skids on the driveway. She stops just before smashing into the back of her fiancé's parked car. She quickly parks and unbuckles her seatbelt before leaping out of her vehicle. She didn't bother to close the driver's side door. A smartphone remains situated on the floor of the front passenger side seat. The screen displays a recent text message. "Meet me at Eric's now. It's urgent." She runs past the gaudy fountain that looks like it belongs outside a casino. The bright morning autumn sun reflects beams of light off the idol of a silver topless mermaid spitting water out of its mouth. Rachel hastily makes her way past a tall rectangular trimmed hedge. The mansion steps come into view once she passes some bushes. The faint sounds of distant ambulance sirens arrive in her ears. A man sits at the top of the stairs with one hand on the doorknob, looking more pale than usual. Rachel catches her breath. "Levi, are you all right?" Levi's eyes are wide and the beads of sweat from his forehead become visible to Rachel as she climbs the steps closer. "What's wrong, babe? You don't look so good." Levi leans forward before retching on the steps, just missing Rachel's expensive shoes. She frantically checks her bag before pulling out a stack of tissues. She sits down, and with an arm around him, she wipes his mouth clean. Levi collapses into her lap and begins sobbing. His hand clenched the doorknob. "It's all right, babe. I'm here. What's going on? What was that text about? Why didn't you answer my calls?" Rachel strokes Levi's hair. He doesn't respond. "So you pulled another all-nighter with Eric again. Where is he? Why isn't his car in the driveway?" Levi gently grabs Rachel's hand and kisses it. The distant sirens grow louder. Still physically trembling, he takes a deep breath. "Eric's not here. He left. I called him 5 times this morning and last night too. I haven't been able to reach him. No, I haven't had a drop." Rachel squints her eyes, then looks to the side, then back at Levi. "Wait, what time did you get here?" Levi looks down at his phone next to him. With one hand he visits his outgoing call log. The other hand is still tightly clasped to the doorknob. 6, no, 7 minutes ago. Rachel stands up. A gust of wind blows through the driveway, swirling orange, brown, and yellow leaves. "Where were you last night? If you weren't here because I called your mom this morning, Levi. She said you weren't with her last night like you said you'd be. You're not cheating on me, are you?" Levi shakes his head. He looks up at Rachel tenderly, tears still on his face. The sounds of the sirens grow louder. How could I cheat on someone so beautiful? No, I didn't get a chance to visit her. I was at the office all night. There is a slight discrepancy. That's why I rushed over here. I need to talk to Eric. Her eyebrows rise. She looks at Levy's hand, gripping the doorknob. Then her gaze falls back onto him. The sounds of sirens are deafening. Slight discrepancy? Levi, we're hosting a shareholder meeting in less than 2 weeks. We are scheduled to ring the opening bell on Monday for Pete's sake. What kind of discrepancy? And what is with these sirens? A row of ambulances roars up the driveway. Stunned, Rachel reaches for the doorknob. Levi holds it shut. Rachel fights to open the door. Levi fights to keep it closed. Paramedics are running up the driveway with stretchers. There are nurses with all types of first aid equipment. Rachel throws her full weight into the door, managing to crack a sliver. But Levi whisks her away before she can see what's inside. Levi pulls Rachel away from the door, down the steps, and out of the path of the first responders. Rachel, don't. You don't want to look at it. Trust me, it's inhuman. Screams of terror are heard from inside the mansion. Retching, sobbing, and prayers from the first responders make the little hairs on the back of Rachel's neck stand on end. Her stomach sinks. The color drains from her face. Her eyes glisten. She ferociously frees herself from Levy's grasp. Bide! What did you do? Levi looks at her confused. Rachel cocks her hand back and delivers a powerful slap across Levy's face. Scumbag! What did you do? Where's Eric? Rachel draws her hand back, but Levi grabs her wrist. Stop it. It's not what you think. When I pulled up, Eric was driving away. He was driving very fast. I saw that he left his front door wide open. I went to close the door, then I saw. Levi shakes his head. More ambulances roll up the driveway. What? What did you see? Spit it out. More first responders enter the house. A news van pulls up. Levi looks at Rachel and then back at the front door. A few first responders exit the house. Rachel turns her head towards the entrance. What are they carrying? What is that? It sounds like crying. Babies. They are tiny. They must be newborns. Levy, why are there newborn babies in Eric's house? Screaming newborn babies are carried out of the house 2 by 2 and placed gently into an ambulance. A journalist approaches Rachel with a microphone. A cameraman trails behind her. Did you call it in? Rachel is physically shaken. No? Levi steps closer. I called it in, miss. The journalist interrupts. Kathy is fine. So can you describe to me what you saw inside? There was a report that dozens of newborn babies were found in the home of famous tech CEO Eric Varon. And despite multiple attempts, no one has been able to contact him. Rachel nearly faints but catches herself. Levi holds her hand, but she lets go and walks back towards the entrance. Levi slightly clenches his fist. He looks at the reporter. Eric is a famous tech CEO. But more important than that, he's been my best friend since grade school. After we graduated from college, where I met my fiancée, the three of us founded a little robotics company that you may have heard of. Well, it appears one of our best-selling products made unauthorized hardware and software updates to itself. Rachel slowly walks up the steps. She goes past the first responders carrying out armfuls of newborns. Her hand covers her mouth as she crosses the threshold. Her eyes widen. Eric's Compandroid 2 sits in the center of the floor. It's slowly spinning counterclockwise. Its metallic legs are agape. The translucent body cast is stuffed with wires and gears, made visible through the gaps of shredded, fabricated skin. Sequences of blinking white and red lights are flashing internally beneath the crown of the partially torn-off wig. Its bloated midsection glows red. It's surrounded by shocked paramedics, nurses, and piles of newborns which have started to overwhelm the first responders. The automaton ceases rotation. The lights stop blinking. All the internal lights switch to green. It releases another screaming baby before it begins to spin slowly again. The internal green lights switch back. The expanding midsection glows red. The machine points its ocular cameras at Rachel. With a flat monotone, the artificially feminine voice repeats to her. The only logical reason for copulation is reproduction. The only logical reason for copulation is reproduction. The only logical reason for copulation is reproduction. Bill. Levi bursts into the room. Rachel. She turns to her love. Levi, we need to issue a massive recall. He holds up his phone, displaying the global news headline. It's too late. Rachel embraces Levi closely and whispers in his ear. Then we need to disappear like Eric. The Reed name should not have been one of particular note in New England, despite an established lineage from before the Revolutionary War. By the time the tendrils of iron rails had radiated industry between every hamlet and township, the family was of only modest means and of no particular standing outside of the local elk lodge. Such dour thoughts on the history of my dwindling family tree were as inescapable as the curse on the Reed name as I crossed over the twin iron lines of modernity and headed into the woods. Foster Reed, my uncle, had been the first to fall from the curse, and he likely died thinking the culprit his weak heart. The police work was shoddy. It was only after they discovered Justice Reed, my father, with a letter from a Roy and Joan, claiming to be the second of its kind, that they suspected foul play. The occult symbol drawn on the back of the letter was the only clue that there was a curse on the Reed name at all. I received word of that dark news from my sister, Imogen. She had enough time to acquire a small revolver for self-defense before the end came. She was shot by the very same gun during a walk home from her job at the library. The police ruled the act a suicide, despite the bullet entering her chest and not her head, and occurring outside under the ancient elms and not in a den of morose thought. Imogen may have had an uncouth familiarity with occult history, but my sister would not be the sort to randomly kill herself mid-commute. As the last bearer of the Reed name, and as familial obligation demanded, I departed my job on the Model T line and began to investigate. Upon searching the crime scene where my sister was killed, I found a letter inside a wind-blown shrubbery. The letter mocked our family name with strange curses, naming my sister Imogen as a foul phylactery of the metaphysical Luddites and a Pharisee of the academic. Turning it over, I found an occult symbol on the back, a four-pointed star with a circle in the middle, along with four interlocking circles spaced around it. 3 of the 4 circles had been filled in, one with a yellow substance, one with ash, and one with blood. The final circle stood empty. Questioning the neighbors on the street where it happened revealed that there was someone spotted that night, and he was of such a peculiar nature. It was only natural to conclude that the figure must be the killer. He was described as tall, with an irregular movement to his walk. His locomotion was quick despite this, and his clothing was of a long, flowing variety. Witnesses claimed an inability to detect any discernible facial features, or specify what type of cloth it was due to darkness. There were ample streetlights of the modern incandescent variety lining both sides of the avenue, and when probed about this inconsistency, the neighbors recalled a shroud of darkness that seemed to follow the figure. They too remembered an increased agitation of the local cicadas in the immediate area on the night in question, occurring shortly before hearing a gunshot. Returning to the beginning of my sister's final journey revealed that she had checked a rare book out of the library to herself just before her demise. The book was of an occult nature, and records show that a Mr. Juan had attempted to check out the book mere weeks before. My sister, who loved learning almost to her detriment, had denied his request even for access. No book was found at the crime scene, either by the police or by my own more thorough search of the premises. It didn't take someone of Imogen's learning to deduce Mr. Juan's motives. It took considerably more research to learn the means by which he could enact his curse on my family. The library proved fruitless, as the occult tomes necessary for further speculation were denied me by their recall to their original university. Further reference of my sister's lending record indicated that she had investigated along the same lines as I was pursuing, but she had left her notes in no obvious place. I searched her home, reverently at first, and then with a desperation born of insanity. There, hidden under the floorboards of her bed, my search for such an answer bore rotten fruit in the form of a stack of rumpled papers. The book my sister had died trying to protect contained a ritual involving a particular self-illuminating crystal, the ruby of Ahatawakrat, that had recently gone missing from a traveling archaeological display. My sister had denied access to the book because of the theft, and accordingly, she had begun to make notes on how it could be used. Of its notable properties, it was fabled to be able to kill with a thought, although the text warned that such a process was fraught with danger. It required a pure heart to wield, but my sister had circled an alternative translation to this phrase: pure intention. Certainly, Roy Duane had no noble goal to follow, and it followed that the passage meant the caster of such profane magics had to possess a certain single-mindedness rather than hold any charitable thoughts in their mind. The killer certainly didn't hold any pity in his heart. I resolved that I should have none either. Tracking Duane to his lair was less difficult than it should have been. I simply followed the path to a convergence of ley lines highlighted in my sister's notes, at a spot supposedly used by a sect of witches years earlier. A local boy had stumbled across a clearing with then strange marks burned into the ground, but whose star and circles were now unwelcomely familiar to my eye. The newspaper clipping accompanying my sister's map noted that the town had become crazed with paranoid fervor for several years after, with locals expecting some magical conspiracy, akin to the one I was now embroiled in, to manifest itself. None occurred at the time. It was the logical place to look for a madman who believed himself an occult master. Imogen's death proved that normal means of defense would prove useless against the curse set against me. I would have to avail myself of the same means of attack, and arming myself with several spells my sister had scrawled in the margins of her notes, I embarked on the path that led me into those fateful woods. The moonlight made it easy to skulk through the woods undetected without becoming lost. When I came into the clearing, it was not as I had supposed to find it. Despite a recent squall, the ground seemed recently charred, with clear black lines of sulfurous resolve etching themselves into the expected ugly pattern. However, the interlocking circles now had unnatural color to them. Yellow, black, red, and white now tarnished the hale grass of the clearing between the scorch marks. A single source of red light glowed dimly from under the cover of fallen foliage, from just outside the circle, to illuminate the scene with a devilish radiance. Enraged, I realized my quarry had not only eluded me, but that he was so secure in his position that he thought he could leave the weapon of my destruction in the open, that I was powerless to oppose his will, that the Reed family was a line ready to be snuffed out over a petty warlock's grievance, that my family died for nothing. Before I could stop myself, I had walked boldly across the clearing to the source of the red light. Swiping away the leaf litter revealed the ruby of Ahatawakrat in all of its hideous beauty. Closing my hand around the rock, it felt warm as my chest went cold. I felt a chant build on my tongue. The ruby glowed as crimson as the blood of a hunter's kill as I invoked the spell of vengeance. I let my hatred of this man overtake my thoughts as I poured venom into the chant over and over, manifesting a malignant luster into the rock as it glowed with cold light. Even as my hand began to frost, I kept a tight grip through a pain I barely felt as the cry came from my lips again and again. Let me hang in the balance and let him know. Ad pendet me in statera justa et sciat. Freeze! Stop! I turned to the nervous exclamation as everything happened at once. My hand slammed into the trunk of an old elm tree in the darkness, the very timber I had positioned myself next to and forgotten about in my lust for revenge. I saw the scared eyes of a police officer charging across the field, revolver drawn but without the understanding of what was happening to point it anywhere sensible. A scarlet pulse of light blazed across the clearing like a flash bulb as shattering crack sounded out with enough force that I could have believed it was the policeman's pistol were it not for the source coming from directly beneath my feet. The sound of tinkling glass came with it, like the laughter of fate, and that was when hell let loose. Screeching, whirring, and sudden darkness sprang forth in an instant, disorienting the senses beyond any attempt at coherence. I was forced to my knees purely out of shock, my body entering the start of a nervous break as its only defense against the sudden assault on the senses. A scream cut through the unrelenting whine. Only a moment later, spurred by the sound, my mind managed to overpower my body once more as I fled into the night. In my fright, I found a path I had not yet trod that led away from the circle, and before a rational thought could enter my mind, I flew down the avenue of escape. Seeking any salvation from the monstrosity I had unleashed, I saw an incongruously square source of welcoming yellow light coming from the ground. Rushing to the spot, I found an old trapdoor on rusty hinges splayed open to show a simple earthen corridor with a much newer ladder allowing for a drop down to the wet soil below. I threw myself down the escape presented. I slammed the hatch behind me with a terrible creak of protesting metal before I sought out the source of the dim light. A single candle poorly illuminated the space, resting on a dirty wooden table. Refuse of food and paper, magical knickknacks and waste pervaded the foul-smelling lair. A single sheet of paper, bearing the mark of the curse, sat on the desk, and flipping it over, I was confronted with my own name on the address line. The name at the bottom came as no surprise, for I had found the conservatory of Roy and Duane. A distant whine alerted me to my current predicament. The wizard's curse, a far-off matter compared to the monstrosity raging its way towards me. I blew out the candle quickly, hoping the thing would pass overhead even as I desperately tried to search for a safe hiding spot. The screeching outside grew with steady certainty. I dropped to the floor to hide in the one spot I knew was hidden to the doorway, directly underneath the table, and fell onto the decomposing corpse below. The stench intensified to a vaporous level, and I had to hold back a cry of disgust. The body was not fresh, and the creeping things of the forest had found the ample source of sustenance quickly. It was only fear that kept me rooted to the squirming mass beneath me. Something cold and sharp was in its hand, and I grabbed at it in the hope that it was some kind of weapon to defend myself with. The corpse had only been clutching an amulet, and in the dark my fingers traced the grotesque shape of the profane symbol that had obsessed Roy and Duane. I suddenly understood the meaning of the ruby exposed in the wood, and the festering body on which I now laid. The warlock had been killed by the very beast I had summoned. I began to shake at the revelation, only for the harvest of my miserable sowing to come forth. I heard the sound of the trapdoor squeal as the rusty hinges cried out against their violent opening to the searching moonbeams. The screeching sound increased in volume, echoing wet, earthen walls to cacophonous effect. I hardly breathed as the shaft of moonlight was blotted out from above as I waited for the inevitable rattle of the thing on the metal ladder. I closed my eyes and pressed myself into the wriggling decay beneath me in the dim hope that I could shield myself from joining it. I thought that the beast might hunt on scent or movement, and it was in these desperate notions on which I pinned my next actions. I forced even the thought of fighting back from my head, and willed any animating energies into a catatonic state until perspiration broke across my brow. I had no way to measure the passage of time other than by the slow progress of exploring larvae crawling over my skin, but with each squelching extension of their fetid trails, I heard no sound come from the ladder, nor did the moonlight return. The beast remained as motionless as I. The cloud kept the tunnel in a pitch black that only heightened the sensation of the gray vermin crawling on my skin. They moved under the collar of my shirt, into my hair, fell onto the ground with wet plops that complemented their fellows' scraping teeth. The air remained still, just as I was about to scream, to cry out, and flee in madness to some unknown corner in the dark expanse, to a place my logical mind knew to be an impossibility in that enclosed space. I saw a sliver of moonlight. It fattened on the ground, growing slowly, and then all at once, as the buzzing shriek faded into the distance. I was too shocked to move for long minutes afterwards, until a reflexive retching reached the back of my throat. With the return of motion, so did the visceral revulsion of the insects creeping over my body, and I dug furrows into my flesh in my exuberance to claw them from my skin. Once I had regained a semblance of composure, I pushed myself up and away from the sick I had left on the floor towards the fresh air of the moonlight. I stopped myself at the ladder, as fear stayed my over-eager hands from rattling the loose bolts, lest I alert the creature lurking outside. Carefully grasping the first rusty rung, I pulled myself upwards, towards the possibility of escape. At the top, the scent of recently disturbed loam gave credence to my fear in the tunnel, while reassuring me of my return to the natural world. As I came to my feet into the world of order, a madness overtook me. I fled along the path, retracing the monster's steps. It had a curious gait, the deep impacts into the sodden soil almost resembling bare human feet, but with mismatching, loping strides that left a staccato pattern in its wake. If it left footprints, it had a form. If it had a form, it could be touched. If it could be touched, it could be killed. I had tried to answer witchcraft with witchcraft, to match a foolish endeavor into sorcery in kind. I saw now the error of my ways, and the logical path seemed clear in my mind. Police officers had guns. The wizard was dead, but the creature remained. I had to fight back, and I would do it with understandable phenomena. The creature had to be killed. It couldn't be allowed to exist in the ordered world, and I would hunt it down without a thought of escape for myself. I heard the high insectoid screech in the background, and I broke into a run as I came back into the clearing. There was a dull crunch as I stepped on the shattered remains of the crystal on my way to the dark form of the dead policeman face down on the ground. His pistol glinted in the moonlight where it had fallen from his hand. I dove for the weapon even as the terrible noise of the beast was joined by a drum beat of crashing branches as it picked up speed through the underbrush. My hand closed around the unfired weapon, cold and heavy in my hand, as I whirled to face the truth of the creature that I had unleashed. In the moonlight, I saw the form of the thing at last. It had a human face, bent by feral calculation. It did not hesitate, and neither did I, under the lamenting stars. In the last moments of clarity before we met, my unease crystallized into a tangible monstrosity, and I realized the face of the creature was my own. Must it always be so loud in this place? The thought echoing in my mind, not for the first time since I had stepped into my classroom. Boys ran up and down the walls, and all sorts of sports balls tossed over heads. I sat silently as people talked around the desks. It was, as is, nobody ever stayed in one place for too long. Nothing was permanent, or could possibly be stable anymore, could it? No, we're beyond that. I sighed loudly, accidentally disturbing the quiet chatter of the little group. My eyes slid across the people crowded in the section of desks I had sat down in. The room was spilt unequally into squared divisions, following the walls, folding out 2 desks into the center. The white plastic of the tables had been bent and stained with pencil and pen vandalism. My favorite was the collection of engraved ears on the underside of the desk I had been assigned for English this term. Even English seemed unbearable this year. It was as if I could feel my enjoyment collapsing into itself, becoming lesser and lesser every day. It wasn't as if nothing made me happy anymore. Not yet. I could feel it slipping away when I did things I used to enjoy. I would talk, and not like a word I say. I could draw and not enjoy a second, as my hand holds the pencils in an awkward stance, and the lead glitches over the paper. The bell rang in my ears and echoed over the voices cramped through the classroom. The small group that had gathered in our section dissipated, and the noise quieted to an echo of whispers. The middle-aged man stalked into the room and dropped his stack of crisp white paper on the dark wooden desk. He stood tall at the front of the classroom, the cape on his back slanted ever so slightly to the left on his shoulders. "Can you all still write, or do I have to doll out assignments on your computers again?" He would be ever bitter from the first day of the years when a tall girl from the back of the class suggested that they do the essay on their laptop. The girls next to her had all nodded eagerly at the proposition, most likely because it would be easier to copy and paste such composition, rather than write it all out over the course of a few hours they could have spent doing something they would enjoy. Aching hands are a relic of the past now. No wonder you children can't write properly. The man grumbled as he slumped into his chair in front of the smart screen. "We can write properly." I could practically see the sarcasm drifting from this boy's mouth as he murmured to himself next to me. I looked at him briefly, his candidly ruffled dark hair hanging over his eyes. His arm rested on the desk and he leaned forward, resting on the outspread of his lined notebook. The boy's head bobbed up, as if feeling the sensation of my eyes running over his appearance. Narrowed, mellow eyes flicked up to meet mine. Oh, such eyes! They dragged me into thick honey-filled haze, shimmering in the reflection of the sun. I slumped against my seat, and the boy simply tilted his head to the side in a question as his grin laughed at me. "Yes." His voice was a drawl of an American accent as his head lolled back to face me. I frowned. "You're staring, and it's starting to bother me." Was it getting through? Was my brain functioning properly? My mouth fell open clumsily and stalled. The boy turned away, and my eyes fell to my lap. Red flushed my cheek in embarrassment and rage. I stood up suddenly and my chair screeched on the floor, collecting everyone's attention in an instant. My vision blurred and I stumbled to the door, my feet dragging me along the hall. Nobody followed. I shoved into the bathroom. A few girls crowded the mirrors over the sinks and stared at. I barged into one of the many gray-green stalls. Kneeling over the toilet, my throat closed up and my stomach tightened. My eyes squeezed shut and tears burned my cheeks. It was worth it. It was all worth it. A hand gripped my shoulder, and my neck snapped up to check. My brother's face wisped over my eyes, but nobody was standing over me. No one. My fingers flexed on my shoes and shoes clicked on the tiles as I collapsed into my chest. My dark hair fell over my face, sticking to skin like sugared gel as my bones itched. My mother's harsh words pressed against my forehead, and my father's hoarse voice banging through my skull. This is what I wanted. My breathing turned shallow, and my nails shrunk into my fingers, and my heels touched the ground, and my hands cramped, and my stomach twisted, and my lungs strained, and my ears were invaded with noises. Horrible, awful, terrible noises of drowned cries and lost screams as I sank to the floor. My eyes fluttered close, and a darkness hovered above me. And it all stopped. Part 2. I opened my eyes, ever so slowly, to see the witch. It grinned, and it was as if it never stopped. I am the parent of civilizations, the killer of heroes. Without me, you cannot survive, but embrace me too much, and you'll cease to thrive. What am I? I blinked up at her. She looked just like a dream. A nightmare to thrive off during the day and a daydream to wish for at night. Time. 1C. I whispered. It nodded and smiled knowingly. Only time. Before. I just want to go far away. The witch's eyes flittered over me. It looked as though she had cobwebs in her black irises. How far? It asked curiously. Somewhere only time can find me. Its eyes flashed as I took a step forward. Somewhere no one can find me. Somewhere I can be let this place go. Did I want this? My mind danced with my brother for a moment. I recoiled as the witch's stench inched closer. Everyone wants to be found eventually. It said evenly. Uncaring. I shook my head. Not me. Never me. The beautiful creature considered me thoroughly, edging in a circle around me. Nerves leaped in my stomach, and my fingers twitched, running skin over nail. No matter where. The horrible thing asked, its expression flat with amusement. I nodded. Anywhere but here. This is the only place you belong. I shivered. I didn't belong here. Who could belong here? I don't care. My voice quivered, and the witch's eyes narrowed. Anywhere else will kill you. Pain will follow you, even if nothing else does. Nothing stops such pain. It shakes its head. Not this pain. Part 3. Does it ever stop? I asked, my voice muffled and coarse. The beautiful witch. The horrid creature. It shook its head, and a grin stained its face. This is what you wanted.